So let's get into our first case, which is an update from a previous case. So this case that we covered is really old, and I don't think a lot of you will remember when I covered it because it was the first serial killer deep dive I ever did. But Canadians will likely know who I'm talking about, so this is going to be a brief overview of the case. In the early 90s and 2000s, there was a huge uptick in missing women cases in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was discovered years later that the RCMP had been aware that vulnerable women were disappearing for years, and they didn't alert the public to a possible predator and more or less swept the case under the rug for literal years. It's believed that upwards of 49 women were either abducted or lured to the property owned by Robert Pickton and his brother David Pickton. The women were killed, dismembered, and their bodies were fed to pig livestock. It was a brutal case, and it was in the news for years and years. In 2002, RCMP received a tip that there were illegal weapons at the Pickton farm. When they searched the property, they found a trove of personal belongings from a lot of missing women, which prompted an excavation of the property. Over the next 5 years, anthropologists searched multiple areas of the property and found bone fragments of 26 people, though experts believe there could be many, many more. Robert Pickton owned property with his brother, and initially both brothers were investigated. However, it would ultimately be only Robert who was arrested. So Robert Pickton has been in prison since 2002. While in prison, he told an undercover officer that he'd killed over 49 women, but while in prison, Pickton has been making some interesting claims, especially recently, which makes his death kind of interesting timing, to say the least. In 2016, he released a memoir from prison called Pickton in His Own Words. A majority of this book is nonsensical. There are Bible quotes, spelling, and grammatical errors that make this book nearly unreadable. But what was made clear was that Pickton was alleging that others were culpable in the murders on the farm, including members of the RCMP and Vancouver PD. It's alleged that Pickton has been telling fellow inmates that he is in the process of writing another book, or he was in the process, and in this book he was planning on naming names. As of February 2024, Pickton could have applied for day parole at 74 years old. Also this year, RCMP filed a petition to dispose of all the remaining evidence from the farm to clear up space in their warehouses. But it's well known that not all the evidence has been tested, and there's still many victims whose cases have not been closed yet, and victims that have not been identified. So with Pickton set to start being able to go out on day parole with being very open about being willing to talk and name names, it's very interesting timing that he was attacked in prison by a fellow inmate. The inmate is allegedly Martin Charest, who used a broken broom handle to critically injure Pickton by what is being described as spearing Pickton in the head. He was airlifted to a hospital in Montreal, but ultimately he died of his wounds a week after the attack on May 31st, 2024. Now, many are calling his death a relief and karmic justice. Families of the victims are grateful he won't be allowed to get that day parole, nor will they have to attend any more hearings or court proceedings. But with Pickton's death, the evidence in the case may be approved for disposal. The advocacy group Justice for Girls is still going forward with appeals to continue preserving the evidence until the full scope of what happened on that farm is known. There are mixed reactions to the news here. What do you guys think? Was this jailhouse justice or something more nefarious? Pickton has been in prison for over 2 decades without incident, so why now? So I want to play a news segment about the case, and if you want to ask any questions, please do so now, and we will do the Q&As after the video plays.
Robert Pickton was in hospital after being attacked at a maximum security prison in Quebec. Today, Correctional Services Canada confirmed that he has died of his injuries. The 76-year-old was found guilty of murdering 6 BC women, but bragged about killing nearly 50. Georgie Smythe is here in our Vancouver newsroom. So, Georgie, what more can you tell us about this? What more do we know?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction from the death of one of Canada's most notorious serial killers is what you'd expect really here in Vancouver, where many of his victims were taken to that pig farm in Port Coquitlam. BC's Premier David Eby said good riddance in a statement, adding that it's a difficult day for anyone who lost someone they loved because of his cruelty and heinous crimes. Pickton was charged with the murders of 26 women in 2007 and was convicted of the second-degree murder of 6 women who disappeared from Vancouver's downtown east side. BC's Minister for Public Safety, Mike Farnworth, spoke just a short time ago and reflected on that gap between the number of suspected victims and how many formed part of his conviction, underpinning that many families will not be getting any closure from the news of his death today.
It's going to bring back a lot of memories. It's going to bring back a lot of hurt. And it's still going to leave unanswered questions, particularly for the families of those victims who, whose remains were found but have either not been identified or, Pickton was never held for account for the crimes that he is alleged to have committed in those particular cases.
In total, the remains or DNA of 33 women were found on Pickton's farm, and Pickton had once bragged to an undercover police officer about killing up to 49 people. Sarah?
Georgie, you've been hearing reaction from some of the victims' families?
Yeah, and as Minister Farnworth touched on just a moment ago, it is a tough time for victims and an emotional time, many of which, they're still based in BC and reflecting on this news here today. My colleague Yvette Bren spoke with Tammy Lee Pappen, whose sister's Georgina's remains were found on Pickton's farm. She was one of the 6 women Pickton was convicted of murdering. We know that we are sorry what Pickton's death would have meant to Tammy's family.
Closure. It's closure for all my family, my sisters and my brothers. I've talked to my sisters, so we're happy. We're just happy. It's like a peaceful feeling went through me when I found out too. I'm content now, and now I can go on with my life and enjoy my life, because that's what my sister would want me to do.
I should mention as well that years on, there's still quite a lot of anger about some elements of the case, how it was handled, and also the ongoing preservation of some of the evidence that was seized during the investigation. And families of Pickton's victims have been advocating for the preservation of evidence and for women who did lose their lives to Pickton many years on after this court case had wrapped up. And just a few months ago, a vigil was actually held outside the farm. At that particular time, people were bringing attention to the fact that Pickton may have been coming up to eligibility for parole. And a relative of the victim told us at that time that she had hoped that Pickton would stay in prison until the day he died, which is, of course, what has happened today. Sarah?
Thanks, Georgie. Okay, now I want to welcome Lorelei Williams. Her cousin Tanya Holick was one of Robert Pickton's victims. Lorelei is an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and she joins me now from Vancouver. Lorelei, thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a hard day, I'm sure, or maybe not. I mean, tell me, when you heard that Robert Pickton had died, what went through your mind?
Oh man, a lot of emotions for sure. Happy, sad because I miss my cousin. I felt like there was justice, guilty for feeling happy. But yeah, just all these emotions. But I feel like, happy. I'm very happy.
Yeah. And you've been talking to families of some of the other victims as well today. And what's that conversation like?
I have. I met up with a few of them, and we actually want to celebrate. We're going to meet tonight to celebrate this, actually. And, one of the family members, Michelle Pinot, who I'm very close to, her daughter, Stephanie Lane, was murdered on the farm as well. She was hoping that Pickton wouldn't die on Stephanie's birthday, May 28th. But after that, she was like, he can die now. And this is how we're feeling. This is how we've been feeling about it ever since we heard that he went into the hospital.
I think you're entitled to feel those feelings. Your cousin Tanya, I want to talk Tanya Holick. Let's say her whole name. She was one of Pickton's victims. She was not one of the 6 findings of guilty. She was her DNA, her clothing were found on the farm, but the charge related to her death, it never made its day in court. How does that sit with you now that Robert Pickton is gone?
It feels like we got some justice at least for that, since her case was stayed. I feel like court should have went on longer and he should have been charged with my cousin's death. But this is some sort of justice. It's jailhouse justice. However, the timing is really strange because we were supposed to be in court at the end of the month. So that's very strange to me.
And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But before we move on from your cousin, I want you to talk to me about who was Tanya Holick. Tell me about her.
She was my older cousin who I love. Beautiful, beautiful person, beautiful smile, very protective of all of us. There's a circle of us cousins, and she was the oldest. She was the oldest one, and she was very protective of me, and that's why I fight this fight. That's why I raise awareness, and I want to honor her at this time. It's very hard for me thinking of her.
I'm sure it is. I was thinking back to how long this has been. Are you all right?
Yeah, it's just hard thinking about her and what he did to her, and he got what he deserved, and it's strange, he was murdered himself, and there was jailhouse justice.
I was thinking back to how long this has been such a major headline, particularly in the province of British Columbia. And I don't know how old you are, but you must have been pretty young when he was first arrested. And then it played out through court.
He was arrested, I was 22.
Yeah. And then
I was 16 when he went missing and 22 when he was caught.
At what point did you decide to become an advocate in this for your cousin and for others in your community who've gone missing and been murdered?
During the Wally Opal inquiry, it kind of just happened. I wanted to honor my cousin and get my missing aunt's picture out there somehow, because I have a missing aunt right now, and the advocacy work just came. It was almost like I was meant to do this. I didn't plan it. It just happened. And once it started, it just hasn't stopped.
I know you didn't go to court for Robert Pickton's trial. I understood that you thought that would be too difficult, and then that is certainly fair enough. You have been back to the Pickton farm, though, hey? Multiple times over the years? How come?
A couple of times. It took me a very long time to even go there. I never, ever, ever wanted to go there, but I came to a point in my life where I thought maybe I needed to go there for my own sanity. And, it was the last place that my cousin was. So when I finally was able to go there, I think I've been there 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah, and it's such a different place now than it was back when the arrest and the investigation were taking place. Before I let you go, I need to ask you about multiple ongoing lawsuits related to Pickton's case, including a bid right now to stop the RCMP from destroying related evidence. The RCMP have said that it's all cataloged, it's there. If ever it were needed again, that they have access to it. I think you feel differently from that. How concerned are you about that evidence being destroyed?
Well, I think the timing of Pickton getting a broom through his head is very suspicious to me, especially because we're supposed to be in court at the end of the month. And I do recall the police saying with him, if he dies, then the evidence is gone as well. So right now, some of us families are fighting for that evidence not to be destroyed.
And how
So,
come, Lorelai? How come you're fighting? I want you to be clear. Why is it you want that evidence not to be destroyed? Why is it important?
it's important for that evidence not to be destroyed because we know that there was others involved in this and it wasn't just Pickton. That's why. And yeah, we were up for court at the end of the month and Pickton was opposing this. And yes, he died, but I feel like he had something, like with him opposing it, he might have had something. I was hoping he would have had something that we could have worked with. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping he left something behind for us to see. I don't know. I really don't know, but
Yeah, answers that may be gone with his death. Well, Lorelai, it's been really, it's been great to talk to you, to catch up with you. I appreciate your time, especially on a day like today. Thank you so much.
mhm.